Okay.
Okay. As we make our way back, this is a good introductory story to fasting, to what I wanted to say at the beginning about the golden triangle, about linking it to love. This was a story related to smoking, but for me, I would also apply it to every year. For a while, every year, I try to give up drinking coffee. It didn't really work, but Deacon Dennis said there was this guy, I don't know if this is a true story or not, but he says it is. This guy who he went to his local pastor and said he was planning yet again to attempt to give up smoking for Lent. And the pastor said, no, you won't. Because every time you try, you become a grouchy, difficult person to be around. So this year I would like you to try something else. Then. Whenever you take a smoke break, just give thanks to God for tobacco or whatever. And do what you got to do and work on being a better person. And apparently he came back some weeks later and said, you know what? As I've tried this new approach, it occurred to me that I haven't been smoking. So it just kind of, the desire went away. But for me, I know I tossed the plan out that I would try to give up caffeine just for high blood pressure, and then after about 4 days, I noticed myself getting short with people and getting kind of grouchy, and I just said, maybe I'll reduce my coffee, but I won't give it up. It's not helping me to become a more loving person, in other words. Well, that's what we come to now, this list on proper fasting. Right out of the gate again, the first point is ideally try to make sure your fasting is linked to your prayer and your almsgiving, or at least one of those. It will make it more powerful. Again, these are random thoughts in no particular order, and there could have been 15 verses 10, but I just settled on 10. There's a quote I put, I think I heard this first in Eastern Europe. I went to Medjugorje once, and in Medjugorje they still have this custom of fasting every Wednesday and every Friday. And it's such an intensive fast observed by the entire town, to my shock when I was there one year during Holy Week, that if you went to any single grocery store in town, the only thing there was to buy for food was loaves of bread or bottles of water, because they were fasting on bread and water. I've never been to a place like that. But there it was, and tens of thousands of people living by this, and they were using the old guideline of Wednesday, the day we traditionally attribute to the day Judas Iscariot went out to betray Jesus in the night, and Friday, the day of his crucifixion. These were penitential days. Even in the Didache, in an early first century document, they talked about making the holy days different from the days the Jews kept days of fasting. They did it apparently on Monday and Thursdays, I believe, but for the Christians, Wednesdays and Fridays, and that explanation was given. But they had this saying, chew the water, drink the bread. It had to do with kind of an approach of fasting, whatever you fast from, of taking a very easy pace with it, kind of just slow down. And you don't sit down for 3 rushed meals. You just try not to be so intense about it. It's just a thing you take on, and you get used to it with habit over time. Now, I want to argue ultimately fasting from food, other than Fridays of Lent and Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, we're asked specifically to focus on food and drink, but you could take that same approach, just with a calmness and a patience, I guess, is what I'm going to say. Just the overall tone is that it's just flowing through my days, nothing to freak out about or stress me out. But maybe instead, if you're wiser, you would look at the golden triangle and say, in terms of myself, what is standing in the way of me loving my neighbor better? And what is standing in the way of me loving God better? Maybe you would say, well, I surf the internet like 4.5 hours a day. Yikes. How about surf the internet 2 hours a day? Now you have 2.5 hours to spend with God or serving your neighbor. Maybe you don't even have to go cold turkey. Calculate how many hours a week you watch TV. Fast from that. That is consuming your time to serve God and serve neighbor and spend time. And again, you don't have to go cold turkey. I mean, it's just maybe dialing these things down so that I can improve in love of neighbor and love of God. Improve in my giving of talent, time, and treasure to my neighbor, and giving time in prayer to God. Okay? And just take that gentle, slow roll approach. Number 3, fast from sin. It's just tied to what I just said. Why I don't advocate giving up chocolate or chewing gum or what little kids tend to do. They always label candy, and then on Easter I'm going to pig out and have a sugar rush and become a diabetic. None of that's related to becoming holy. It might be healthier for your diet, but as I would point out in number 6, dieting and fasting are not the same thing. So if you're dieting to lose weight or to be healthier, that does not equal fasting. That's not what fasting is. Fasting is, remember, cutting the chains that are holding me back from being a more loving person. So their motive is different, and therefore sometimes the target is different. So if we're not, another way of asking it is, how is this giving this certain thing up, X, how is this making me a more loving person? Another way you could ask it is, how is this helping me to break from a particular sin in my life that's standing in the way of my growth? However you want to phrase it, I prefer to phrase it in the terms of love, because I want to be a more loving person. And if you can accomplish that, just make sure that the day after Easter you don't return to it. It's not just supposed to be an intensive, otherwise we're sort of have an eating disorder. It's like a spiritual version of an eating disorder. I binge eat and then I go back to, or then I try to go cold turkey. It's not healthy. People would say, even with dieting, just be more mild about it. Eat healthier choices, eat regularly, maybe reduce your portions a little. Okay. Number 4 is, this is a saying from St. John of the Cross, but whether tied down by a chain or a thread, the bird still can't fly. So what he meant was, whether your problem is mortal sin or venial sin, whether it's just a character flaw. Talking too much at dinner might be a sin, but it might just be a flaw. Still, it acts kind of as a thread. Earl told me in the break that there was a desert monk who put a rock in his mouth for 3 years so as to stop from talking. It's kind of like St. James in his letter. He said that the human tongue is harder to tame than a wild animal. It's like a spark that starts a forest fire. It's a hard thing. But whatever it is, whether it's a serious sin, a mild sin, character flaw, it's holding us back. So you got to think of fasting like scissors. Fasting is like a big metal hammer that's going to break a chain. Addiction is the worst form of a chain. If you want an extreme example, addiction, we engage in addiction even when it destroys every relationship in our life. Even when it destroys our career, brings a wedge to our family. The nature of addiction is we have to literally lose everything in our life and hit rock bottom before we can change. That's extreme. But lesser examples are also kind of mild addictions if we notice patterns of sin in our life. We're continuing to do them even though we notice they bring harm to our lives. So fasting is, if we can link up what we give up with those key problems, yes, it requires a little courage. Yes, it requires sacrifice. Yes, it requires rolling up your sleeves and sweating and doing a little work. But keep in mind the end goal is freedom. To become what I was created to be. One of the most shocking theological statements I ever heard in seminary was this, that Jesus Christ is the most fully perfect example of what a human being is, who ever lived. You would add Mary too, because Mary by grace, Jesus by his nature, they were without sin. Because they were without sin, we tend to think, well, they don't sin, they're not like us, they're not human, they're less human. They don't know what life is like in the trenches, concupiscence, and I do the things I do not want to do, like St. Paul. No, theologically, we say they're more human than us. To the extent that you go down into the depths of sin and are addicted to sin, we're becoming more and more like an animal. So that might be shocking for you to think about, but Jesus is actually showing us what it would mean to be human if we got it perfectly right. And Mary, there's a male and female example of fully human, being fully human and fully alive. It's our sin that makes us less human. So another way to say it is, fasting helps me to become more of who God created me to be. The version that God planned from eternity. And if I don't get it right in this life, we talk about purgatory, we talk about purgation, the need for that, so that in heaven at least we can say we've reached that potential, we've been perfected. Which is tied to the fifth one, that proper fasting leads to freedom, not misery. Your goal is not to make yourself grumpy and unhappy. We're not sadomasochists. If that's all it's doing, I give you permission to stop doing it. Pick something better. In the words of some little kid, it's sort of a parallel way of thinking, but there's this little child philosopher on YouTube. He's kind of comedic, and he said something to this effect. This is a paraphrase, but he said, if your chase of your dreams is making you miserable, get better dreams. Because God wants you to be joyful. He said, I came that you might have joy and you might know it to the full. And he came that we might know peace. He said, peace be with you, my peace I give you, not as the world gives it, do I give it. He wants us to know peace, he wants us to know joy. He doesn't want you to beat yourself up. But if we can, as a coach for ourselves, if we can keep always in mind, I'm doing this, yes, and there's suffering involved, there's no getting around that, but I'm doing it so that I can become free. Or I'm doing it to become more human, to become the better version of myself. Maybe that will give us enough motive to stick to it. 6, again, dieting and fasting, not the same thing. 7, in the words of pop culture, and one of the quotes my little brother, the weightlifter, always likes to say, still, even though it's probably a saying from the 1980s, pain is just weakness leaving the body. Yes, if you lift weights, the next day you're sore. That's because you break down your muscle tissue and then it rebuilds itself up stronger. You're getting stronger. That's what the soreness is. When you fast, you're going to be sore. But that's just weakness leaving the body. And if we tell ourselves that, if we get a good internal dialogue to remind ourselves to be our own life coach, again, it gives us a little motivation just to stick with it. As long as I'm assured I'm drawing closer to God and neighbor, I'm becoming a better lover, it's worth it. Number 8, I guess it's the same thought, just said in a different way. This is, again, St. John at the Cross, Doctor of the Church. He talks about the dark night. Some of you have heard of it from his poems. He said, literally, this is the first step in growing in holiness. Asceticism or fasting, sacrificing material comforts. He said, if you can't do that, or if you've never done that, you haven't even taken the first step. This is an absolute requirement. No saint ever skipped one of these steps. And he says actually there are 2 phases. But for beginners, the phase, he would call it dark night of the senses, is fasting from comfort, physical comfort. Then eventually, he said, as you grow and you reach an intermediate stage, he talks about the dark night of the spirit, where now those physical things don't hold me back. If I have them, thank you. If I don't have them, yes, I accept. I embrace the cross, because after all, you know, that's Jesus' requirement. Deny yourself daily. First step right there, deny yourself daily. That's fasting, that's asceticism. Take up your cross and follow me. If you don't do that, you can't be a disciple. It's step one. Very often, we either don't fast at all, or we fast just a few days during Lent and never for the rest of the year. Did you know that every Friday of the year is meant to have a penitential character? That we don't any longer require people to give up fish, because that was kind of a medieval thing. It was kind of a way to separate out grocery items that were more expensive and accessible to the wealthy only versus what the poor people ate. But it didn't do away with making sacrifice. It just said, pick what you want to sacrifice yourself. And we picked, okay, I picked nothing, for most of us. But he said, if you get past that, where I can be comfortable in whatever circumstance, whether I'm hot or cold, whether I'm hungry or full, whether I'm rich or poor, those things no longer control me. I own things, but things don't own me, the way sometimes we say it in modern life. If you reach that point, he said there's still another phase of darkness you have to pass through. It's the dark night of the spirit, in which, in the beginning, we want to pray and maybe do things. We want to think of ourselves as a good person, but we like to have positive feedback. We like to have compliments from people. We like to get warm, fuzzy fervorinos from God. We'd love to have mystical apparitions or have supernatural experiences that God is present. But what happens when God takes all those away? And maybe prayer is just a dry experience. You don't get any warm fuzzies. There's nothing coming back to you in that way. He said we need to do that too. That we're not doing spiritual things because of what we get back from them, but just because it's the right thing to do. Just because it's the loving thing to do. And so even if we have to walk through a desert, that's an important piece. And he said you can't pass through intermediate phase of spiritual life without experiencing that. I think of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, her diary. She said that the last 30 years of her life were darkness. She's still helping the poor. She's still doing all these amazing things. She said it felt like God abandoned her. That is describing the dark night of the spirit. It's unavoidable for progress. So I can't soft sell it. There's no short route. And just knowing that every single saint, every canonized saint of the church had these experiences in their own way, in their own time. Number 9 is proper fasting. An additional benefit, the way I put it is, it restores holy order and helps to end idolatry. I often think of the pyramid. The pyramid, always the top piece has to be God. And then you have a hierarchy. God, my spouse, my family, my faith, whatever things go in that next layer. Then less important stuff, and you work your way down. Idolatry is simply this. You're taking a block that should be lowered down on the pyramid, and you're putting it where it shouldn't be. You're putting it higher than it should be. Maybe you're taking a low thing and making it an intermediate thing in your life. Maybe you're taking an intermediate thing and you're making it the top thing. Anytime you take a block and put it above God, you're committing the sin of idolatry. You might not be bowing before wooden statues, but that's idolatry. So, for instance, popularity. It's nice to be appreciated, to be loved. God has put that in our heart. We love, we also desire to be loved. Popularity is just, if I seek that, if that's the reason I wake up in the morning, then that's my God. If it's above God, and I do things only for the appreciation of others, suddenly that leads me to immoral choices sometimes, because maybe others want me to do things that aren't correct. Money is a really low thing. St. Thomas Aquinas used to say, greed of things I can kind of understand, like you want more food, you want more wine, you want more houses, you want more paintings. But he said, I can't even understand the person who says, I want more money. Money is a thing you use in an intermediate phase to buy those other physical things. But if you put that as your number one thing, I want material comfort, that's your God. Fasting is restoring holy order. You could say it that way. It's taking a block that's in the wrong place, that's climbed too high on your pyramid, and you're putting it back where it belongs. Last one, fasting gives us back the power of no in spiritual warfare. It gives you a backbone. If you think you're a weak person, sometimes fasting teaches you you're stronger than you thought. If I can say no to cigarettes, I can say no to Satan. Maybe. The next time a temptation comes, I can reject it and just say, I don't need that for happiness. So, in order to grow stronger as a spiritual soldier in spiritual warfare, fasting is absolutely necessary. In the modern church, we've lost this to our detriment. Okay. Any thoughts or comments about fasting? Yeah.
I realized last November when I had a colonoscopy, I will not raise hands to see who else had to do that, but I had to fast. And I had to do it for a reason. No problem. Comes to Lent, all of a sudden, oh, I gotta fast. I have problems. Why that this you know?
Now that's interesting. So her example was colonoscopy. Not a pleasant experience. But I guess it would put it in the same category as what I said, dieting is not fasting. If you're giving up food for a medical reason in preparation for surgery, or it's January 1st and it's your New Year's resolution to cut 20 pounds, it's not the same. And there's parallel connections at times, but it's not the same as a spiritual fast, because the motive is not physical health, which is a good thing, but it's eternal health, you could say. Developing my relationship with God.
It showed me that I could do it.
Yes, okay. So medical procedures sometimes can teach you you're stronger than you thought.
Your concept of linking, I think with fasting too, sometimes what we do to ourselves, it affects us negatively, but it affects someone we love. So if we're eating things that make us not well, and it's going to impact our spouse or our children, then in a sense we're being rather self-centered. And I don't think we always think of that. If we're, again, eating things that make us diabetic, which is going to make me lame and blind and need help, I'm not thinking about the person I love, because they're going to be having to take care of me and give up. So sometimes I think food
Health can,
is
can be linked.
a purpose for the health part. Is if I can't think about it for me, think about the one who's going to maybe have to take care of me, pray for me, whatever it is, or lose me.
That's a good point. If you diet but have the broader picture in mind, spiritual health in connection with others. For instance, if it adds years to your life, that's years to spend with your spouse and your children. I've seen it on TV commercials that feels a little bit like a guilt trip, but it also touches on the truth. For someone who's, say, grossly obese, they can't play with their children, they can't do certain things. Suddenly, to be free of that impairment, you get a new lease on life. That's true of other things as well. If you're addicted to something, literally it means you care about that thing more than you care about people, and even if it harms your friendship with them. So I wouldn't want to say it's one or the other. There's definitely overlap, but if you fast, you could also get the additional benefits of health or whatever. Just the end goal, as we define it, would be different. And so, as long as we keep that link with love and try to think of that golden triangle, it's going to help us better.
You can tie that with prayer too, because there's sometimes you're trying to do something like that. As BJ said, trying to do something, whether it's medically or otherwise, you're trying to do something you're addicted to, or something you don't want to do, but you have to do. It's always a good idea to ask God to help you, because 9 times out of 10 He will.
Yeah.
So you can tie the getting rid of an addiction. In many cases, a prayer to God can sometimes stand you strong in that effort.
That's a good example. Let's say you started engaging in fasting fasting for a health reason, but you turn to God to ask for strength to keep it up. It's kind of leading you to a better version. That's good. With that, let's go to the section on alms then. Again, in no particular order, but I just, to keep the pattern consistent, I'd say number 1 is try to link your almsgiving to prayer and fasting, if you can. Number 2, this is something Marie Chandler first told me. And she got it from a book on parish life, but I think it applies to almsgiving. Your personal or your family budget is a theological statement. We can trick ourselves into what's important to us. We can say certain things are important to us, but if you really want to know what's important to you, look at how you spend your money. That will reveal, and it might not always show you the picture you want to see. Is there any space in your family budget or your personal budget for almsgiving? For supporting charities? For supporting neighbor? If not, then there's a big giant missing piece. That's a theological statement there that you are lacking in love of neighbor. The ancient model used to be to give 5% of your net income annually to the poor and 5% to the temple. It's a good rule of thumb. Tithing is what it is, but 5% to the church, 5% to other charities. It's a good model. Some people who have a very limited or fixed income, maybe that's too high. But if you have nothing dedicated, I think it's to your detriment. And I would say I'm not going to let anybody off the hook. If it hurts, it needs to hurt. It's actually point number 3. It really can't talk about it as sacrificial giving unless it hurts a little bit. It's bringing you some inconvenience. It's causing you to give up something else. I'd rather buy a fishing boat. I'd rather take that vacation to the Bahamas or Disney World. This is going to set that back a year or whatever. But the damage it's doing to your heart is worse. So we need to try and carve out some space for that as just a part of who I want to be as a person. I don't want to just live for myself. When you ask people at the end of their life what they regret, nobody, it's a cliche, but it's also true. I've never heard it. No one said, I wish I worked more. I wish I stayed at the office more. I wish I had taken a second job and made another $500,000. Nobody says that. They say, I wish I had spent more time with my kids growing up. I wish I had spent more time with my spouse. I wish that, I kept saying at some point I was going to do some public service or charitable work, and I never got around to it. Get around to it. And take a look. A lot of people don't even have a budget. You need to try and start by making a budget, or at least tracking your checkbook, what you spend money on. It's going to reveal something to you. And by the way, I don't mean this to be self-serving, but our stewardship of our parish, I'm told in the news our economy is growing stronger, but our stewardship in our parish is going in the other direction. If you notice, each week we're in a deficit situation, so it's a question that people need to ask. And I don't care. I don't stay up at night ever thinking about money. I will always just live with what we are given and do like what you suggested. For the things that are to come, I say yes, we'll figure out a way. But it's tied to that. Stewardship and discipleship, I think, are closely linked. The one in modern times who's most associated with giving till it hurts is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She talked about the necessity of feeling that cross when you give. The fourth one is within the spiritual order, you can only keep that which you give away. Saints die with empty hands. Jesus, the way he put it was, to the one who tries to save their life, you will lose it. But the one who loses their life will save it. And there are so many cliches about this, but there are no U-Haul trailers going to heaven. Can't take it with you. So, store up your treasures in heaven is the way Scripture likes to talk about. What it's talking about is what I give away, and especially, it's not like paying taxes. I pay taxes without any love in my heart, believe me. Almsgiving, I'm doing it with love. And anything that's tied to love is a treasure being stored up in heaven. Because St. Paul says the greatest virtues are faith, hope, and charity. And the greatest of these is charity or love. Why? Because we don't need faith anymore in heaven. We see God face to face. We don't have to believe in a God we can't see anymore. We see Him. We don't need hope in the resurrection anymore because we've experienced the resurrection. But love remains. God is love. And we will enter into that love. So anything in this life you've done out of love, that's a deposit, direct deposit to the eternal bank in heaven. I saw a hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes I've experienced this where, because I'm in life with other people, I want to give something away just because I don't need it and it should be given away. And other people around me don't want me to give it away because they want the memories, you know, and so it's hard to process things when it's not just you making that decision.
That is true. It's a very good point. So she brings up the complicated point of you maybe want to give something away, you want to simplify your life, but somebody wants to retain it because they associate happy memories with it. Well, in that case, if you're guided by love, I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer.
Right. Because
the loving thing to your family might be, okay, you have it then. But I would say to people, here's where I store my memories,
Right.
not in the things.
I know.
But it's true, maybe that's the more loving thing, let them hang on to it.
Yeah.
But I would also say this, giving of our excess is good, that's charitable, that's Christian, but it doesn't rise to the level of number 3, which is go past just my surplus,
Right.
get it till it hurts.
Right.
That's a hard thing to live, by the way. There was a Franciscan nun in seminary who every year she made a review of her house and she gave everything away.
Wow.
Then she went down to the thrift store. She always just wore hand-me-down clothes, or her habit, and, so she didn't really need to buy clothes, but she gave away everything. And even though she drew a salary from seminary, I'm pretty sure she gave that away too. She gave to her order, but if there's any portion given back to her as an allowance, I'm sure she gave that away. Money could not stay in her hands. You wouldn't want her to be in an administrative position overseeing finances. That would not be her charism. But it's amazing to see. Pope Francis, in my opinion, one of his greatest witnesses is that he travels around in a used car. He still stays in the conclave apartment. He's refusing to stay in the papal palaces. The papal palace, if you don't know, has been turned over to Syrian refugees and refugees from other countries and the homeless of Rome. So it's being occupied, but by about 150 people who are in poverty. When you see those things, wow, amazing. Archbishop Glasney used to teach me on this. He said, between every assignment, give everything away, only take with you what you can fit in your car. If you need he said, in his opinion, if you need to get a U-Haul trailer, you have too much, you should give it away. So donate to the parish on the way out here. You have my furniture, you have this. I just start out again with nothing. And I've tried to live that. It's amazing how you accumulate stuff. Even in his retirement, he said he had to vacate the bishop's residence. He started by saying, if it's still in the attic after 14 years, I don't need it. I had never even unpacked it. Then he said, at my age, I want to give little keepsakes. You could call it regifting, I guess, but he did it out of love. I want to give these things to other people to remember me by.